night stretched wide and merciless, a vast sweep of darkness spilling over the plains where the wind carried every sound like a whisper of confession. The woman's cries came weak and broken, blending into the rustle of the dry grass. She was on her knees in the mud, her breath shallow and trembling, hands pressed tight against the wound in her side. The blood seeped between her fingers, warm against the chill of the autumn air. Her hair, once a bright tumble of gold in the sun, was darkened with dirt and sweat, clinging to her face in tangled strands. The moon hung low, a pale coin behind thin clouds, its light spilling across the scene like a silent witness. The rancher stood a few paces away, hat in hand, his breath a fog that vanished as soon as it left him. His coat flapped against his legs, the edges stiff from dust and cold. He had come running at the sound of her scream, the echo of it cutting through the quiet fields like a blade. Now seeing her crumpled in the dirt, the echo of that sound still rang inside him. He couldn't move at first. The weight of what he saw held him still, rooted him like a post in the ground. His eyes traced the outline of her body, the tremble of her shoulders, the way her fingers kept slipping in her own blood. Her voice came soft, ragged, each word catching in her throat like a torn thread. She said it hurt so bad and she begged for it to stop, begged him to help. The wind swallowed her words, scattering them like ash. He tried to answer, but nothing came. His jaw worked, his lips parted, yet his voice refused to leave his chest. He had seen men shot before, seen cattle torn by wolves in the aftermath of feuds that ended in blood, but this was different. This was someone who had once laughed in his barn, who had tied a ribbon around his wrist for luck before he rode into town. This was someone who had known him before silence became his only company. He dropped his hat without meaning to, and it hit the ground with a dull thud. The horse beside him shied, pulling at the reins, its breath steaming in the cold. He murmured nothing to calm it. His hand trembled as he took a slow step forward. Then another. The mud squelched under his boots, each step feeling heavier than the last. The lantern hanging from his saddle cast a wide, wavering circle of light over the ground. It flickered against her face, highlighting the sheen of sweat on her brow, the pale blue of her lips. Her breathing hitched, a sharp sound that made his stomach twist. She was losing strength. Every few seconds her hand slipped from her wound and slapped weakly at the mud before she pulled it back again. Her voice cracked when she tried to speak, the words barely more than breath. He crouched beside her, close enough now to smell the copper of blood and the sharpness of wet earth. He could see the jagged tear in her side where the sharp rock had torn through when she fell down the ridge. It was deep, far deeper than any wound that could be patched or bound with cloth. He reached out, hesitating before touching her. His hand hovered an inch from her shoulder, fingers twitching. When he finally made contact, her body flinched, a tremor of pain running through her. She turned her head toward him, eyes glassy with tears and moonlight. He could see his own reflection in them, the lines on his face carved deeper than he remembered. She smiled faintly, though it was more a shadow of the motion than a real expression. He wanted to say something, anything, but all the words that came to him sounded wrong. What could he say to someone bleeding out in the dirt because she had tried to help him? He had told her not to climb the ridge after the rain, told her the rocks were slick and treacherous, but she had insisted. Said he shouldn't mend the fence alone, said she wouldn't sit idle while he worked himself to exhaustion. He had laughed then, the sound of it echoing off the canyon walls. Now the memory of it burned. She coughed, her breath coming in short bursts. Her hand trembled as she reached for his, and when he took it, her grip was weak, but her touch was still warm. She told him she didn't want it to drag on. Her words came slow, deliberate, like each one cost her something to speak. His chest tightened until he thought he might break apart from the pressure. He had known the truth the moment he saw her wound, but hearing her say it made it real in a way he couldn't escape. He looked down at her, his thumb brushing over the back of her hand. The skin there was slick with blood, and he couldn't tell if it was hers or his. He lowered his head, his voice rough and low, the sound of it barely carrying past the wind. He told her she shouldn't have gone near the ridge. He said she should have stayed where it was safe, that she never had to prove anything to him. She smiled again, just enough to show the corner of her teeth. Then her expression softened, the light in her eyes flickering like the lantern flame. She told him she didn't want him to do everything alone anymore, that he had carried the world by himself for too long. The rancher swallowed hard, his throat dry and aching. His hand moved to the side of her face, brushing away a lock of hair that clung to her cheek. The motion left a streak of red there. The smell of blood was everywhere now, heavy and metallic. He could hear the distant cry of a coyote, long and low, carried over the wind. Somewhere in the distance, the faint creak of the ranch gate swayed open and closed. Everything felt far away except for her. She was fading fast. He could see it in the way her eyes unfocused for a heartbeat too long, in the way her hand grew heavier in his grasp. Her lips moved again, forming words too faint to hear. He leaned closer, his ear nearly to her mouth, and caught the faintest whisper. One last plea. She wanted it to stop. She wanted peace. He froze. The gun at his hip felt impossibly heavy, a weight that seemed to pull him down into the mud. He had carried it every day for years, used it for mercy on animals too hurt to be saved, used it for defense against men who meant harm. But never like this. Never for someone he loved. His pulse pounded in his ears. The world seemed to shrink until there was nothing but her face, pale and still, and the dark metal of the revolver gleaming in the lantern light. He took a deep breath, tasting dust and rain and regret. His hands shook as he drew the gun, not out of fear but from the unbearable weight of what he was about to do. She saw it, and for the first time that night the pain in her eyes eased. There was no fear, no hesitation, only trust. That trust hurt him more than anything else could. He bent closer until their foreheads almost touched. He could feel her breath, weak and uneven. He told her softly that it would be quick. His voice cracked on the last word, but she nodded faintly, the ghost of a smile still on her lips. Her fingers tightened once more around his wrist, a final strength she didn't know she still had. The lantern flickered, its flame struggling against the wind. The moon slipped behind a cloud. The night seemed to hold its breath with him. He closed his eyes. His finger found the trigger. For a heartbeat, everything was still. No wind, no sound, no movement. The world waited, and then the sound came, sharp, final, echoing across the empty fields. The horses startled, the echo bouncing off the canyon walls before fading into nothing. When the silence returned, he stayed where he was, kneeling beside her, the gun hanging limply from his hand. Her grip had fallen away, her body still at last. The blood had stopped spreading. The lantern's flame guttered and went out, leaving them both in darkness. He sat there until the stars blurred, until the cold began to creep through his bones. The ranch stretched wide and silent around him, endless and empty. Somewhere far away, dawn was waiting, but he didn't move. He stayed beside her until the first pale light touched the horizon, the weight of what he'd done settling into him like stone.